It's coming up. Now we can.
You can? Okay, good. Yeah, because that's the problem with the Zoom, so we can't see what you're saying. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about AI and ethics, and I'm from newly named School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence, or SCAI, in Arizona State University, and also I'm a CIO for AI Foundation. Okay, so let's see if I can get this to work. Um, I put the slides on the chat, and I guess people are able to get that. Actually, just make sure that they're there. Yeah, I think I no longer can look at them, but I think I put the slides on the chat, so you should be able to get them from Bitly link. Okay, so I assume that even though it's kind of late in the day, that you're all by the before you even came, and definitely after the two talks, you're all completely sold into AI. Within universities, we are certainly sold into AI. Universities are falling over each other to start new programs. MIT started a college of AI. CMU started an undergraduate degree in AI. China unveiled a high school AI textbook. India is starting AI in like the 8th, 9th, and 10th grades. And then, of course, at ASU, we never wanted to be left behind. And so we realized that all of these guys are too far and too late. And so we started having this in utero AI program before the babies are born, so that they're like ready to go with the AI flow. Jokes aside, I would basically, since I'm mostly be talking about the ethical aspects, which tend to be more critical in general. So let me start with a positive note, that AI technology will have many profoundly positive impacts. I've been working in AI before it was cool. I think I did my undergrad thesis back in 1983 on speech recognition, for example. And I think that the potential of the technology is great. So it's going to have great impacts on our quality of life, in terms of universal access, in terms of doing social good, and of course, in terms of intelligent augmentation, not just automating things, but also helping us do things more effectively. So there's a lot that you obviously have to be happy about AI, and that's not surprising. That's why you obviously got in, listen to various people on AI and so on. And that sort of explains the hype around AI for quite a bit. Of course, all technologies are dual use, and intelligence is the ultimate technology. And so intelligence is the ultimate dual use technology. So this is a slide actually AI Foundation folks used and that I just borrowed, that so basically, slowly AI will start having doing things like conversational jobs, transactional jobs, maybe some sort of a human AI cooperation. But then on the other side, all these good things, that the negative things can also happen. We are having fake reality. We will have bias and manipulation. We, of course, have unemployment, technological unemployment, and labor revolution sorts of things. And then, of course, unsuccessful human AI cooperation are existential threats. Some people are very worried about this in terms of what might happen. So obviously, it's a dual-edged sword, and the bigger the technology, the more its dual uses are. And that's exactly why you need to have some sort of a more cogent, serious discussions about ethical uses and deployment of the technology. Okay, so to put things in perspective, I think just this week, or I think just last week, Pew Research Center did put out this article saying they interviewed a whole bunch of experts about whether or not they believe AI technologies will be ethical. And they were all very worried that they might actually, that in fact, companies are likely to be using profit optimization for good reason, presumably. And so it's going to be, in the beginning at least, more worrisome in terms of ethical uses of AI. So there's already some worries around this issue. So the kind of this is a very large topic, honestly. But so what I'll do is try to, this is of course, try to give you an idea of some of the important issues. And as I said, feel free to ask questions in the chat. And if they're important, I'm told if they have to be answered right away, I'm told Lisa would interrupt me and ask me those questions. And then of course, you can always ask me after the fact. And you can connect with me either on Twitter, or if you go to the Twitter page, you'll have my email address, etc. Okay, so AI ethics. So first of all, I want to kind of say a little about why now. AI has been around since like 1956, and at least the name. And of course, the quest to make intelligent machines have been around since the times of Golem, right? So if we are always trying to make things that are like us, from our perspective, the most interesting part of ourselves is our intelligence, right? So then the issue, of course, is in the beginning, of course, when AI technology was being developed, between 56 and maybe even up until like 2000s and so on, research community was certainly interested and thinking about ethical implications of AI technology and so on. What changed significantly is that at that particular time, world didn't really care as to what AI researchers thought. Now that changed quite a bit. Basically because people are very worried about what AI technology can do because they're actually seeing it being used everywhere. So I'll say a little as I go forward as to like a thing that you may want to keep in mind as to the difference between the AI development, before 2000 versus now. So I should also mention that much of what I'm saying, I've been writing these as columns in The Hill. They're all available for you. You can look at them up. In fact, probably, pretty much several of these columns are relevant to what I'm talking about. So if you want, you can look at them later on. And there is a link from the Twitter page directly to them. But so the first one basically is that, what happened, why exactly suddenly all this interest in AI is sort of useful to keep in mind, because many of the ethical issues surrounding AI really came up because of purely data-driven approaches for tacit knowledge tasks, which have become the center stage for AI applications. Okay, so in terms of the concerns around AI ethics, these kind of revolve around several aspects, but the four that I sort of wanted to bring to your attention are: one, ethical use and deployment of specifically commercial end user facing AI systems. And these things bring up issues such as, are there biases in the system? Are the AI technologies allowing for deep fakes, so that is you can't tell reality from something that people made up? There is this whole worry that we'll see that because of the possibility of connecting your any high dimensional data to any decision, it's become very popular to kind of say that I can look at your face and tell you, whether you're a terrorist or not, whether or not you're a nice person, whether or not you're happy, whether you're sad. Some of these might make sense, some of these don't make sense. We humans do it all the time, but we also know that they are, not foolproof. But AI systems are increasingly doing this, and and it's important to understand the implications of those. There's this whole issue of social control, which is AI systems can model your mental state as you are dealing with them. If people realized people are always on guard when they're talking to other people, because they know that other people are mental modeling them. But they don't realize that when they're using Facebook, for example, and they got screwed because Facebook was mental modeling the heck out of people using Facebook and was able to actually profile them quite well and start using that both mostly for their commercial advantages and sometimes for maybe some advantages for the end user, but mostly disadvantages. So there's this whole issue about social control, and the technologies that are relevant to these things like large language models, LLMs, and GANs, which sort of allow for deepfake generation, have come under major scrutiny. One other relevant issue there is also ethics in autonomous decisions. If a machine makes a decision, who is responsible? In the old days, if a software makes a decision, the software writer is responsible, but that's no longer the case because the software writer is not writing the code that makes the system make the decision. What the system does is a complex combination of what it learned from the data and what are called the inductive biases that were put into the system to begin with. And so it becomes extremely murky. And, law folks are having a field day trying to figure out what to do about the ethics in autonomous decisions and the responsibility aspects there. And then there's, of course, government and military uses of AI. And some of these are, obviously could be good. Some of them are very bad. There's this issue of surveillance. There's also big concern about autonomous weapons. And these things got possible because of the image recognition and drone technologies and so on and so forth. And then, so those are like two big points, the top two. The third one, the ethical research, and the fourth one are the smaller point, but I do want to bring it up. Assuming I have time, I'll have one slide on each on these. But I want to point out that increasingly, people are wondering what guidelines, if any, should there be on AI research itself? Do I just get to do research and hope that other people will make sure that it will be used correctly and ethically? Or should I be worried about even starting certain lines of research? And to what extent are the research communities and ethics and the research communities and the AI conferences, what are the roles that they have to play? And then there's also a related issue that much of the AI system development that is end user facing is, as well as the research, is being done in big companies, big tech companies. And they're also trying to do the ethics research corresponding to them. So some of the big companies have also ethics in AI groups. This can lead to all sorts of interesting issues, even though people may not start out with the idea of trying to bending the ethics to support their bottom line. At some point of time, companies will be looking at their bottom line, and the ethics groups working within companies, it sort of brings up all sorts of interesting meta-ethical issues. And that has also become like a huge thing. Those of you who have been looking at what has been happening at Google and its ethics group might know some of this stuff. And then finally, the concern about AI ethics has also kind of led to at least some parts of the people in the AI community, especially to look at AI ethics as a lever for global ethics and look at all sorts of other ethical issues, because after all, as we'll see in a minute, much of the work, much of the way the AI systems work is basically by training themselves on the data that is available. And this data is sort of the digital footprints of our lives. And to some extent, we are not particularly ethical. And I'm sure each one of us think we are, but obviously we know that everybody else isn't. And so the data that you are seeing is bias-ridden, basically unethical, and has examples of unethical behavior and so on and so forth. And so the question then becomes, how do you change the society itself, maybe, so that the data on which you are doing these systems would be better? So in fact, use some of the searchlight that's being focused on the AI itself to look at these bigger issues. So those are like the big ticket items. So if we run out of time, or if my computer falls apart, at least you know which are the big things. And then, I sort of sent you the links to my slides. Okay. I should also mention that although this is completely about AI and ethics, which is sort of more of a discussion-oriented thing, my research itself is essentially human-AI collaboration. I have talks on that from my webpage. The most recent one, for example, is getting AI agents to interact and collaborate with us on our terms. This is connected to explainable AI for robots to show interpretable behavior, robots to provide explanations for their decisions, and so on. There are connections to some of the bigger things we'll be discussing here, but the specific research that I do is that particular direction. Okay, I should also mention that it's not just a bunch of angst. People are looking at more proactive things that actually they can do, constructive things that they can do. So at least in terms of my own role, I was part of starting this conference called AAAI ACM Conference on AI Ethics and Society when I served as the president of AAAI between 2016 and 2018. And that conference goes on and it brings up an interdisciplinary set of researchers from AI, law, ethics, philosophy to talk about, in a scholarly fashion, some of the deeper issues of ethical design, ethical deployment of AI systems. So that is a continuing conference. The most recent one just got done like last month. You know, the proceedings are available from the ACM Digital Library. You are welcome to look at them. I also served as on the Partnership for AI, which is a great organization that it's continuing. I was on the original board of directors. What they do essentially is to sort of have companies and nonprofit organizations come together in a forum to think about best practices for AI technology. And so those are things that instead of just sitting in an armchair and thinking about what's all falling apart, there are many people doing proactive things, and two proactive things that, you know, that I've been involved in are this AI Ethics and Society Conference and the Partnership on AI. Okay, so now I'll get back to actually looking, going through this overview of AI and ethics. And I should mention that it's a hard hat area. Ethics is, you know, again, I have a Twitter account, and I once in a while feel like saying something about AI and ethics, but you have to be extremely careful because it's a somewhat polarized spectrum of views on what should be the right approaches to take in for some of these issues. My point here today is not to make up your mind. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from this old Columbia School of Journalism seminars where Fred Friendly used to end the seminar saying, not to make up your mind, but to open it, to make the agony of decision making so intense that you can escape only by thinking. That's what I want to do, even though I'm nowhere near Fred Friendly. I want to just bring to you all the pros and cons of different positions, and hopefully you will be able to make up your mind as to, you know, what you want to do about those specific aspects. But I do want to mention that if something that I said as representing somebody's position is kind of ruffles your feathers, please realize that this whole thing is a somewhat fraught area. In fact, I think people giving, you know, ethics talk should have hard hats. I only have my Make AI Great Again hat. That's not going to help me much. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention before going into the specific ethics issues is to kind of give you a perspective. This turns out to be the first article on that Hill series that you can look at later, about thinking about how human babies get their intelligent behavior versus how AI developed in terms of getting its intelligent behavior, because it winds up being extremely useful in understanding many of the issues afterwards. So, you know, if you have a kid or if you've seen a kid, you know that kids come in doing perceptual and manipulation intelligence. They can, you know, recognize their parents. They can put, you know, anything in their mouth. They show emotional intelligence. They know how to smile. They don't, even before they know what smiling is, they know how to smile because evolution nicely made them, you know, co-opted our brains and their brains such that if they smile, we'll do whatever they want. Then they have social and communicative intelligence and basically language and figuring out other people have different beliefs than them. And only then they get to cognitive and reasoning intelligence. This is basically where they would go and take SATs and get into high schools and take your tuition dollars, take your money and pay as tuition dollars to the universities, which is great for me. So this is the kind of an approximate way human babies develop. And so thinking in terms of AI, you know, there's a lot of, you know, hype. For example, as the demand for AI experts raises, more and more colleges and universities are offering courses and curriculums in the discipline. MIT, blah, 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 is doing this, like I said earlier. There is a whole bunch of things about how companies are jumping on the AI bandwagon. And then some in the Phoenix conference suggested, only half in jest, that software makers will eventually package their programs like a detergent saying new, improved with AI. This is all great, except this is interesting when I point out to you that these are all headlines from New York Times in 1980s, the old employer of John Markoff. And these are all directly taken from headlines and the articles from 1980s. So AI existed obviously before 2013, in case you aren't aware of that. And there was like previous hype cycles. And the last time around there was a hype cycle around AI was because of the expert systems and then reasoning systems, which like the Deep Blue. And only very recently, AI systems started doing well on what we consider perceptual tasks. that is speech recognition, image recognition, and language. These are the things that only started becoming feasible before they were able to actually do a lot more deeper reasoning tasks. So the interesting thing, and this is one slide I want you to keep in mind, is that humans went in one direction, perceptual to emotional to social to cognitive reasoning. AI systems in the research got developed in the opposite direction. First cognitive reasoning intelligence, then much more recently sort of perceptual and manipulation intelligence. And it's kind of interesting to see why that happened. There are all sorts of interesting reasons why that happened, and so understanding some of them will help you understand why there is a new worry about ethics in particular. So why did AI develop in this reverse way? It turns out that it's easy to program computers on aspects of intelligence for which we have conscious theories. And so these are what are called the explicit knowledge tasks. So progress in the big reasoning and cognitive intelligence happened because we had theories about how to play chess, theories about how companies should be run and so on. We're not particularly conscious of perceptual and manipulation intelligence. And so we had to depend on making machines learn those things just the way we do, which is learned from enormous amount of data and demonstrations. I mean, in case you didn't realize, your kids just hang around doing nothing for years on end, taking your money, basically looking at what's happening around the house and sort of soaking it up essentially, because you don't know how to teach them how to look at the world. You don't know how to teach them how to even hold a bottle. They sort of do this by trial and error. And so these are called the tacit tasks. And for the tacit tasks, you had to wait for learning to become feasible. In particular, I'll show this Carl Jung's thing in a minute, but essentially it's important to realize that a lot of AI from data became feasible when data actually is available freely, which wasn't there before. Data was being produced all the time, but it wasn't being captured. And now we have a way of capturing it. And so internet and web has become essentially sort of our collective subconscious. And so that's a store of everything that we ever thought of. And then that can become the food crumb, those becomes the digital crumbs for training these systems. Now, of course, I don't want to go into why the AI caught imagination right now, but of course, one of the issues is it's very important. I mean, that's the reason why kids develop the way they do. If you have a kid who doesn't know how to smile, who doesn't know how to hold anything, but can do calculus problems well and do SAT tests well, it's very hard to kind of start being in love with them. So the same thing happens sort of for the AI technology. Essentially, when it started being able to do things like the perceptual tasks that we take for granted, that's when they started becoming useful in all sorts of places. And that sort of caught public's imagination. And then that also led to all sorts of worrisome hyperboles as to what AI can do beyond that. Okay, I do want to mention this once more in a bigger form, because I already mentioned earlier that internet and web have made it possible to sort of reify our collective subconscious and put it on the cloud. And this can then be used to train AI systems. Gary and other people in Vision know not too long back, a time in not too long back, when the entire vision research depended on a picture of this one woman called Lena, who basically was essentially a Playboy model picture that was cut out in such a way that it's presentable. And then they use that as almost the way to figure out whether the edge detection is working, some other things are working, and so on. And now even the public domain teaching level ImageNet data is about 14 million images, for example. So that is something that we take for granted, but that's actually a very, very important development. And that is uncontrollable. What people put on the web is their raw conscious, raw subconscious. And so raw subconscious is rife with all sorts of things that you don't want to see in polite company. Just because you don't want to say it in polite company doesn't mean that you won't put it on Reddit. That doesn't mean that you won't put it on 4chan, doesn't mean that you won't put it on all sorts of other web forums. And so you then develop your training, you train your systems on this data. Don't be surprised that these systems have all the biases that the majorities in the society happen to have. There's no real reason to be surprised. We just know that the system one's biases are filtered out by our system two, but these poor machines don't have that capability. They basically are unfiltered at this point of time. And that kind of leads to pretty much most of the ethical issues around AI. I wouldn't even want to go into these sorts of things, the impressive feats in perceptual intelligence. You know that you can do image recognition, you can develop these kinds of pictures which are indistinguishable from humans. You can write text. GPT-3, for example, can write coherent text, not meaningful, but coherent text that probably means something to the person looking at it. Just like Rorschach ink blot doesn't have any meaning except in your head. That's the same thing that's happening in these kinds of scenarios too. And of course, there are certain things like narrow AI, that AlphaGo and so on. Those also have been quite useful. In fact, the biggest worries have really been on the what I would call shallow and broad AI, broad and shallow AI, where there are no guarantees. And that winds up becoming a huge problem in terms of ethics and in ensuring that there are no biases and so on. Okay, so of course, the kinds of things that are available has caused all sorts of irrational exuberance in industry. There's a land rush mentality in the industry to exploit AI technology before their competitors. In fact, there is some stuff saying that 40% of the AI startups in Europe aren't involved in AI like at all. In fact, just like the 1980s New York Times article said, you just put new and improved with AI on the on the box, you will get more people. Just like that New York company, which just said they are into cryptocurrency and suddenly started selling a lot more shares and so on. So that sort of a thing has been happening within AI. In terms of irrational exuberance in society, mad rush to use AI perception technology for surveillance uses, probably for safe societies, but also impinging on private liberties, AI for crowd control, AI for job interviews. You know that that lady in Hong Kong was wearing that mask way before we all started wearing masks because of coronavirus, because she knew that by putting some mask on her face to some extent, she can defeat the image recognition systems that are widespread in all over China and Hong Kong. AI is being used for job interviews. AI is being used when you use, in some cases, into, when you're using your toilet. AI is being, as I said, for the job interviews in many cases. Again, people are using it. They don't necessarily tell you this. And so this winds up becoming all sorts of worrisome issues. We do this individually. When you look at my face, you might think, oh, this guy looks in these funny ways, etc. You have a system too to stop you from blurting that out. AI systems don't have a system too. They will just directly use that in their decision making, and then you start worrying about the implications of that. And of course, in India, for example, AI systems are being used to support matrimony or the marriages, and of course here there are all these dating sites and so on. This is a little research point before I go off into all the worries, which is that while the pendulum has swung from explicit knowledge tasks to tacit knowledge tasks, it's actually, in some sense, unnecessary revenge of this guy Polanyi, who worried long back that people spend too much time thinking about explicit knowledge tasks rather than tacit knowledge tasks. And AI now has become all tacit knowledge tasks. And that's a worrisome scenario. And in fact, so if you go to my Twitter page, it has this robot there saying, human, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot learn, data to learn the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Half the problems that you will see in ethics come because machines are just directly going from data to decision. We somehow held that up as like a great thing, but we have both a system 1 and a system 2 in our own minds. And the system 2 has all sorts of societal restrictions, etc., that we take into account before we make our decisions. And those tend to be in explicit knowledge, and those are just not currently connected back to the data-based AI. So that winds up being an important thing. I have a viewpoint in February in CSCM on Polanyi's revenge and AI's neurons with tacit knowledge that you might be interested in looking if that part looks of interest to you. Okay, so coming back to AI and ethics, So the first part, ethical use and deployment of commercial AI systems. So the first part I want to talk about is fairness, transparency, and privacy. Back in 2015, somebody submitted a paper to computer vision conference saying, here is a system that can look at the face and tell you whether or not you are a criminal. And what did they do? They trained a system with a huge number of photos of people who have already gone to jail, and also photos that of people who haven't yet gone to jail. And the former is criminals, the later are quote unquote not criminals. And then the system learned some way of distinguishing between these classes. And then you give your face or my face to it, and the system will say something. And then they will actually compute the quality of the decision in terms of how many false positives, false negatives, how much accurate it is. And it turned out that it was pretty darn accurate for the set of data that they were looking at. Would you be interested in living in a world where that is possible? You may not like China. Here is Israel. There's a company where Israeli facial imaging claims to identify terrorists and pedophiles just by looking at the face. And then they basically apparently also say by looking at the face that whether or not you're an academic researcher. I want to know whether it will say that to me. And of course, AI is being used for job interviews. Again, this is high dimensional data, a big deep net, and a decision outside. And given enough data, even enough parameters, you will learn some function. The question is that function at all connected to anything other than superficial correlation? That is something that is a problem, but you can't stop companies from using this technology, given that there is this worries about fairness and transparency and privacy. In fact, I've given up on this since about 2016. I have made my life simple. I actually, instead of grading the papers of my students, I just basically take the pictures that they have, the mugshots that they have on the grade roster, and I have trained a 1,500 layer network that will just say whether they should get an A or B or a C or a D, and I just give the grades like in the beginning of the class itself. If that sounds like, oh my God, who the heck will do it? Think about what is being done left, right, and center when people are saying we are using image classification and all sorts of data, including, by the way, not just criminality detection. What do you think is happening when somebody trains like an X-ray, takes a bunch of X-ray images and tries to decide whether or not you have a particular disease or not? There was a paper in Nature last year where they showed basically that this melanoma detection system was essentially depending on doctors' marks saying, look this again. They put a red mark if there is any melanoma photographs that need second look. It basically realized that that second look mark is the most distinguishing feature of whether or not it is a real melanoma. And so, well, that's correlation. And that's what these systems are supposed to do. And the question is, when that happens, you can easily be going into the, exacerbating existing biases, and also making bias is bad, not just because, of course it's bad because of the person who is affected by the bias would feel less than human, but from the point of view of the person who's making the bias decision, they're making an inaccurate decision. You are essentially making wrong decisions without any causality, and so that can ultimately wind up catching up with you. If you don't, if you think all of these are sort of made up, and some of you, if you haven't seen this, maybe some of you have seen this, there is a How Normal Am I, which is a website that you can go to right after this talk. So hownormalamI.eu, and it's a beautiful site that basically requires you to have a webcam and starts making all sorts of decisions about you, including beauty score. And I was happy that I was above 5. I got a 6. So I think this is legit technology. Although I think I would have gotten a much higher number if I had put some talcum powder and made my face more whiter. But the point is, I want you to, if those of you haven't thought of this, go and look at How Normal Am I. While you're having fun, this guy downstairs will be saying all the uses that AI is being used for without your knowledge. In fact, there was like 2 weeks back, there was an insurance company which said other insurance companies take a long time to decide whether or not your claims are supposed to be approved, but our insurance system is all AI based. It looks at people's faces when they call for making the insurance claim, and they can tell from the face whether or not they're lying or not. And so they use that in deciding whether to approve. So they're very fast. They said this is called Lemonade, the insurance company. And in fact, of course, when there was a huge hue and cry about it, the company sort of backtracked. But this is the kind of the temptation to use this sort of converting any high dimensional data to any decision variable using huge number of parameters, parameterized neural network in the middle, is just too hard to resist if you have enough data, and that causes all sorts of ethical issues. So people have shown, of course, things like machine bias in terms of the criminal justice, in terms of how white versus black people tended to have differential, bailing procedures, bail approval procedures, and then. That's by the way, if you haven't read that, you should read that article. It's a very interesting article. And also in this particular slide that you're looking at, the one on the right top, it basically talks about the Gender Shades project, which is a very interesting project that basically showed that many commercial systems that try to recognize gender, and at this point I should mention that gender in terms of the quote unquote binary gender, I understand that gender now is understood as something that is not just binary, but this was essentially meant for binary gender detection. And even in that, they essentially sucked for anybody who's not white male. They wound up basically not having a good recognition at all for people from outside of the training data set. So they showed this, and then of course people started worrying about this, and then companies then started using diverse data to improve the training and so on. So it's important to kind of realize the bias that data brings in. Most of the problems are actually from biased data gathering. Oftentimes people don't even gather data, they just take the data that is available. In the old days, at least, Alexa wouldn't understand my speech as well as the one that you guys do, even though I consider myself having like perfect Midwestern accent, but it apparently has much less of my sort of speech on which it was trained on, so it was having more errors on that. Similarly, at one point of time, Samsung, Nikon cameras used to have a eye blink detection system that would say to most Asians that they are blinking even when they are not blinking, because that stupid system was trained based on a certain default size of the eye, and that just winds up being wrong if you go out of the population on which it was trained on. Now, that's a place where it's really useful to understand that Samsung and Nikon, which are Asian companies, wouldn't have gone out of their way to be racist to their own people. It is that they were just doing it inadvertently by just taking easily available data. So it's very important to think about what data you're using to train your system. One other thing is basically, in general, we have always needed to gather diverse types of data, but it's just that in the past, we didn't have the wherewithal to do so. Now we really have no excuse. As much as this all looks kind of worrisome, I also think of this other point that sometimes these AI systems trained on the data that is actually available midst of us basically put a mirror to the society directly. There was this thing that during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King said, let me put everything that's going on the streets of US on the televisions in the living rooms of all Americans. And when they see it, and if they feel comfortable, the society is not going to change. If on the other hand, all this while it was happening because nobody really saw it face to face, that's happening when it was happening, then the society will change. And that actually wound up being what happened. So in some sense, as bad as using them to the end user without any care is a bad thing, actually, I also think that these systems trained on massive data showing patterns in the language that we use are essentially putting a mirror to the society. So for example, there's this great thing about LLMs, the GPT-3, somebody showed that if you just give it any prompt involving Muslim men, it tends to, with higher probability, complete it with some violent act. Two Muslim men went and shot somebody. Two devout Muslim men went to their mosque and shot somebody. So this is the kind of thing that GPT-3, the system, was doing, not because somebody wrote any racist explicit knowledge into it, but because in terms of the overall data on which it was trained on, including a whole bunch of data that is unfiltered from Reddit and so on and so forth, it basically thought these were very likely good completions for the prompts that it actually saw. And that brings up this issue. If you want to clean data, what does it mean to clean data? That winds up becoming social engineering. If you're cleaning data, I personally would feel that I would rather clean the society than the data, because if you're doing social engineering, do it on the society, because people at least will be there. Whereas engineers just sort of deciding social engineering is very worrisome, and the data is worrisome, because in some sense that you're making engineers do things that they're not trained for. So that is something also worthwhile keeping in mind. So not only there is this bias issues, and people also have these short-term solutions for sort of, let's clean the data to rid it of biases. But the question is, who is doing it? And if it's the programmer, then the programmer's version of what is bias is actually being taken into consideration there. One of the biggest things that I guess should be obvious to most of you here is, from data, machine learning systems essentially are looking at correlation, and they have no, guarantees at all about causation. And this causation correlation confounding continues, and especially when there are people who are end users who are not well versed in the causation correlation distinction, they might very well consider what the machine tells them as some sort of a quote unquote causal conclusion. And that is something very worrisome in terms of machine-based decisions. Again, correlations do help us in making decisions that increase the survival and success of the agent. I'd like to tell my students in my Intro to AI class that we evolved to run away from the tiger. You just, as soon as you see the tiger, oh God, tiger, and just run away. Have you ever stopped to think about the feelings of the tiger? What if it was a nice tiger? It wanted to say hello to you. It would have felt very bad when you sort of stereotyped it as a violent tiger. Now you replace the tiger with some person, then you start seeing the weight of false positives coming in the human decisions, when you have decisions being made about people. So we may be prudent to insist on use of causal features for critical societal decisions, rather than just say, oh, we can do this, so why don't we do this? Okay. There's this other thing, as I mentioned, I'm also very interested in AI systems interacting with humans, and that's most of my research. And as I mentioned, in fact, a whole bunch of issues come up when systems start profiling you and you do not realize that they're profiling you. We kind of realize at best now that they're trying to put cookies on your server side, but if you, on your client side, but they do a lot more than putting cookies. They're actually trying to find patterns in your behavior, your likes, your dislikes, and so on. They're building a mental model of you. And I always think that if Facebook looks like a person, people would be a lot more careful about what data they put on Facebook. They just don't realize this because it looks innocuous, and evolution did not prepare us to deal with programs that do the kind of mental modeling that we do of each other. Now, it turns out in my research, mental modeling is extremely important for robots to work with us in a fluid, coherent sense. But at the same time, it's one of those things, it's a dual use. You need mental modeling for cooperation, but mental modeling also can be used for manipulation. And so there's a whole entire set of ethical boundaries that come from that direction too. There is a whole entire issue of surveillance that has become big because image recognition at scale is very easy. I know some of you may have read this New York Times piece like a month back, where they found a bad guy based on a massive image search, where the bad guy happened to be in a group photo behind some random guy on that guy's wall. That means the bad guy is in the back of the wall behind me in one group photo. And the system was able to catch that face. Now, you could say, oh my God, that is a very useful thing. In fact, one of the big things that I want you to keep in mind is there is nothing particularly wrong in making data-based decisions if you are doing it in CSCW scenarios, that is computer supported cooperative work. If the humans in the loop, they are able to make up for the false positives, false negatives to some extent that are brought up by the machines, then you're fine. In fact, in this particular case, we were able to catch this bad guy. Many a time things fall apart either because there's no humans in the loop or the humans have automation bias and start saying, hey, the system said so, you must be a bad guy because the system said so. That ultimately winds up being our problem, and we have to sort of be careful about this. So there's a surveillance worries. And we're coming into a point where I don't know how many of you have seen this beautiful cartoon, Internet of Ransomware Things. Everything in your computer, in your home is now on internet, thanks to Len Kleinrock and his friends. And they're all talking to each other and they're basically squealing on you. And it's like whenever you enter your home, you have to shut off a whole bunch of things. I don't know about you. I shut off my Alexa because I don't want Jeff Bezos to know anything about me most of the time. So it's becoming like a big issue in the surveillance aspects. And it's like bigger problems in places like China, that I've already mentioned. And it's coming into fore here too, in US too, and we need to be careful about pluses and minuses. Again, I said it's not necessarily a minus if there is a human in the loop who can be trusted. If you have untrained humans in the loop and they just have automation bias, or end users who just assume the computer said so, you are in big trouble. There's this whole entire issue of autonomous weapons, which is sort of like, I tend to think of Tesla as an autonomous weapon. So if a Tesla hits somebody, who is responsible? Is it Elon Musk, Andrej Karpathy, or you, or the car? And this is a whole entire set of issues that has become important from an ethical perspective. And in fact, in many times, these kinds of decisions, humans may not even be able to be in the loop because some of these decisions are split second. And so you wind up needing guardian AI systems, which wind up looking at the other systems to make sure that their decisions are consistent with some higher level rules that you might be interested in as a society. And that's like a meta research problem for AI too. And that's sort of important.
I'm just going to jump in very quickly. We've covered so much ground, and I know that you still have more to say. I just want to make sure that we don't get away from some of the comments that are going on in the chat right now, and that we make sure we address them. And
so actually, let me just say that, the other things that I was going to talk about are like a whole big section on deepfakes, but there are talks that I've given on deepfakes that you can look up later on. And then the other thing about ethical research that I sort of mentioned already, and about AI ethics as the lever for global ethics. So even if I don't get to them, I'm happier to answer your questions rather than just get to them.
We like deepfakes. So we'll let you get to deepfakes. But Stuart, why don't we kick off with you? I just want to make sure that we do address some of these comments. They've been so great in the chat.
Sure. So one of the things that concerned me a little bit is as we looked at the usage of pre-trained models like GPT-3, if we're basing our models on GPT-3, are we inherently building bias into our own models without realizing it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, look, my sense is all of us are biased. Okay, so when I'm talking, even though I'm talking fast, my system one is making random sentences, and my system two is able to sort of make sure that total non sequiturs and total racist garbage is not being let out. What is happening is GPT-3 doesn't have a system two. It is pure system one. By the way, I'm writing an article for the Hill series that will come up in 2 weeks, just on LLMs. And the very important fact that people misunderstand that just because something is coherent, it doesn't at all mean any guarantees about accuracy, any guarantees about bias. To me, bias is just connected to the accuracy. Okay, it's basically, there's nothing other than this piece of text is grammatical, which is impressive as hell if you understand, because those of us who are non-English speakers hate the language, because figuring out how to speak grammatical language in any language is extremely hard. And GPT-3 almost never makes an ungrammatical sentence. And it makes a garden path essay that sort of makes sense. So people are impressed with it. But there was never any guarantee about any kind of accuracy, including bias, including actual correctness of the answer. In fact, I would say, imagine an essay which is beautifully written that gives the wrong answer about the causes of civil war, and a pidgin English answer which says civil war real causes. Most of us will fall for the better written, quote unquote, New Yorker style English. Unfortunately, because we have evolved to confound form with content. And it worked okay in some cases, but when form can be made, not just by people, even with people, we have this problem. But when you have machines making the form, our inbuilt ways of figuring out form might have connections to meaning or content or accuracy, it just falls flat. And so, yes, if you use pre-trained GPT-3 models, you are inheriting the data on which it was trained. So recently, less than a week back, GPT-3 basically said, we're going to make GPT-3 a little more polite. What will we do? We'll take GPT-3. They have API. I have API access. They were very nice. They allowed me to do some research on that. But they also have the tune-up access, obviously, because that's their system. And so they retuned the system on only polite conversation, so that it has a slightly higher weight to be more polite. This was, they said, they did this because some company that is the client of theirs wanted GPT-3 not to ever say impolite stuff. Fine, it's now going to be polite but racist, polite but incorrect, polite but inaccurate, because we have not trained for accuracy like ever. There is nothing about, because again, our kids learn things and then they also learn how to control their system one. That's when we say they have become mature. And my systems right now are beautiful. I mean, AI has gone top down with explicit knowledge rules, but that has been seen to be brittle in the sense it works very well in some places, will never make these kinds of crazy errors, but it would not be as, having conversations in every possible scenario. And you have the bottom-up systems, which will have conversations in every possible scenario, but can go off the rails and offend the heck out of anybody. But I again think offense is the least of the worries, how much bad that might sound. These systems are not meant to be taken at their face value. And because all they're doing is providing better English. So in fact, in an article, I say that many years back, I used to have this clever Chinese student way before AI boom. Google just existed, 2004 timeframe. He would write a sentence. He would know that that sentence would not likely be correct English. He has the idea, that is, he has the content, but he didn't know the form. So he would give the entire sentence as the search query to Google. This was 2004. And the Google will then give a whole bunch of files which have words in the bag of words representation of his query. And then from that, he can tell, even though he didn't know how to generate good sentence, he can tell what is a good sentence. Just as I don't know how to play basketball, but I might be able to say what is good basketball. So he was able to then pick that thing and then start using it. Imagine what that guy could have done with GPT-3. He didn't have to do this. He could basically rewrite him. Again, GPT is great in CSCW scenarios. There are articles written by professional journalists who have said their life has improved because they have used GPT-3. In fact, when I was writing the GPT-3 article, I took the first paragraph and gave it to it to see if it will write the rest of the article. Turned out to be junk, but I tried. So the point is that if we are in the loop, we can use it. But if they're not in the loop and there's an end user who thinks this system represents your company, have a big chest of liars, because you can get into trouble, not just for bias, but for accuracy, for, everything, because that's not what the system is trained on.
Absolutely. Z, you had a comment about bias and if it's the holy grail or if it's just something that we have to live with. Any comments?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
My colleague Z is going to ask a question.
Okay.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering if, just talking about all of this, this issue of bias, isn't it pattern matching, right? I guess that's the question of causality versus correlation, right? But some bias is useful because you're seeing those patterns and some are problematic. And so then I'm thinking, well, how do you decide which is good, which is bad? Um, and you were talking about how AI a few times, that AI reflects the collective unconscious. And so does that mean that it is reflecting the common kind of unconscious? So is it relativistic? Does it mean that in some cultures, certain kinds of morality is acceptable, and maybe bias is more accepted than others? And then who decides what's acceptable?
Those are extremely good questions. And I mean, the fact that you're thinking about it of my talk makes me think that I may have said something right. First of all, I think that the big issue is when we hear people talking around us in racist terms, sexist terms, and so on, for long, long periods of time, we still don't necessarily, our kids, when they're young, they're more likely to repeat what they've heard. I mean, there's this beautiful Seinfeld episode where this kid starts learning and repeating the F word because he has seen Seinfeld use it. Okay, so that Seinfeld became his, car person. So he thought, if he can use it, I can use it. But slowly they start realizing that there are some meta rules. This can possibly happen from the data-based as well as additional teaching that we provide to our kids. That is the part that AI systems are completely missing right now. In fact, the way the GPT-3 was trained to be more polite, by the way, is essentially going back to explicit knowledge. They sat down, wrote a whole bunch of rules as to what it means to be explicit. And then, unfortunately, people will understand those rules, but our AI systems, purely data-based AI systems, don't understand rules. We went from only rules to only data now. So they converted these rules into a bunch of data, which is completely waste of time. Some of you may have heard from data to knowledge. A whole bunch of AI now is from knowledge to data. So you're taking civilizational knowledge that we have gained over tons and tons of years, and then saying, let's convert into a whole bunch of essays so that GPT-3 can eat it, just because that's the only thing that can eat. And that is the best we can do right now. And there's a lot of AI research that's likely to happen, which will have this connection between explicit and tacit knowledge. That's what my CACM article talks about. When that happens, there would be first of all, some equilibrium, in the sense you don't just do it because this looks like a nice pattern match. You do it also based on your goals. What is your conversational goal? And also what is the roles of the society? I mean, we do this ourselves. I mean, I remember when I went to Japan, because I hung around in US too long, I randomly will be walking, eating, and then all the people in Japan will stand on the side looking at me askance. In Japan, there are little tables next to every possible vending machine, and you're supposed to sit on the table and eat. You're not supposed to walk around and eat. I was just, obviously being rude to them. And then I slowly figured out, and then I did that there. And when I came here, I changed back to eating while running again. So we can do that. Systems can do that too.
All right, Rao, thanks so much, Z. Rao, we have a little bit of time for you to wrap up your slides. Yes. So grateful. Learned a ton. So I'm going to jump off camera just for a few minutes, and then I'll be back for the wrap up. Thank you. Okay.
So very quickly, so getting to the deepfakes part, if perception basically has become real, we always said perception is reality, right? If perception is reality, what happens to reality when AI controls our perception? If AI can make images that look like things that are not, like for example, you have seen that Obama lip syncing, saying bad things about Trump when it was not actually Obama, image spoofing, identity spoofing. Again, these kinds of deep fakes, all of entertainment is based on suspension of disbelief. In fact, when you go to a movie, you know that it's deep fake. It's made up for you to believe in an alternate reality. So in fact, the companies that I am involved with, they do these things like Mindtrains. There's a digital debug that you can look at, which tries to sort of allow, do some yoga if you're interested in that for yourself, right? There are obviously many positive uses of deepfake technology. Once again, there are
era which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit.
Okay, that's so the point. And then the point about that particular video is, many of you may have seen this. Obama never said this. Essentially, people manipulated Obama's video to make Obama say that. And if you're looking at it, you see it has everything that Obama does in terms of his speech patterns, in terms of his facial expressions and everything. It is very easy for people to fall for those kinds of things. If for Obama, because he's such a celebrity, people will be able to figure out whether or not it really happened. If somebody shows you a video of me saying it, you would say, yeah, maybe Ralph said it. You would never know. And so, in fact, my biggest worry of deepfakes, in fact, there was this big deal. We were involved in this thing called Reality Defense Project during the elections to try and stop the misinformation campaigns. And the biggest misinformation campaigns occur for the smaller, like, county councilor or like a Congress representative who people don't know whether or not they would have said that. And this technology has become so simple that, this basically. So that is that thing that you just saw is this app called Zao that came out about 1.5 years back in China on your cell phone, and you can insert yourself in any favorite movie scene yourself. And so if people can do this, the moat for this technology is basically completely disappeared. The old days, people used to do forgeries, of course, but they would be almost as good as the real artists, and they would have to do all sorts of things to do the forgery. Now any Tom, Dick, and Mary can do these forgeries. And so what happens in a world when you have this kind of deep fakes? And in fact, one of the other interesting things that connects it back to bias situation is that people are using GAN sort of technologies and GPT-3 sort of technologies to generate more data when there is not enough data. Imagine GPT-3 generates more essays that then become extra data for some other language training system. Or imagine in this particular case, what we did is we basically tried to take pictures of engineering professors and trained again to produce new pictures of engineering professors. Of course, we didn't have that much GPU resources, so the pictures are not that great, but you can still see most of them look male. So again, what happens? In fact, worse yet, we have shown in a paper that more percentage of these generated professors are male and white than even was the case in the already biased, already unbalanced societal data set that we have. So when you are generating this sort of a thing to, this business of synthetic data generation has become a big thing. This can cause all sorts of issues, including perpetuation of bias. Again, I mentioned bias and accuracy are connected in my head. Your medical doctors are buying technologies that are using GAN augmented X-rays to train themselves. They won't be doing some racist, sexist stuff, but they can be doing some wrong diagnostic stuff for you, and that can be a very bad thing for you. The other thing, that last things that I wanted to mention is the ethical research part, which is that should research that can be potentially having harmful impact be allowed to proceed or be regulated? And if it's regulated, who is to decide whether it's regulated? Can we count on big companies to do research on ethical AI? And I also mentioned many AI conferences already started taking ethical impact statements as part of the paper submissions. And at least some papers in the recent last year have been rejected after going through the reviewing process because their ethical impact statement wasn't right. I mean, it basically was questionable. And so some people think this is a good thing. Some people think it's a slippery thing, because you might say that science should be done, because if you're not publishing it in an academic conference, somebody is still doing it behind the scenes. And as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So if it is open, you will at least be able to see that this kind of technology is being developed. If not, you can be in bigger trouble. So that is something that you want to think about. And the very, very last thing, AI ethics as a lever for global ethics. There are people who are looking at the increased attention to ethics in general technology, in general computer science community, to try and refocus it on the systemic problems. Unfortunately, I can never really get data about engineering professors that is 50% male, 50% female, because that would be doctored data. Engineering colleges are still mostly male and mostly white. And so I really need to change the society to get my data set be more balanced. If I just change the data set, then I'm deluding myself about a different society than the one that I am living in. And that may not necessarily be the right thing to do. And so the interest in looking at these bigger systemic changes is understandable. But again, I don't know whether AI people and the technical people have really any leverage other than bringing some light to these issues. So this is, again, some things to keep in mind. For example, there's this nice Nature paper that says, don't ask if AI is good or fair, ask how it shifts power. People who go to engineering colleges and computer science never heard of power. In fact, the only power they have heard of is essentially watts. But now we are talking about power in terms of marks and in terms of social power. And it's a very different kind of training to think about. So I'll end there. I said, this is sort of, I wanted to give you like an idea of the issues that people are thinking about. There's a lot of, disagreement as to what the problems are and how to solve them, but there's also a lot of, common agreement. As I said, a whole bunch of these things are discussed in the articles that I've written. In particular, the why are AI systems biased, which is that last but one article will basically have a whole bunch of things that I mentioned, as well as the perception won't be reality, which is the deepfakes article. So I'll stop there. And if there are any further questions, I'll take that. Otherwise, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.